This week then, it's the turn of the albino. What makes it an albino is the same with any other animal. It's that the dye that colours our skin, our eyes, our hair, for humans, for every animal, melanin, that is actually not present in any albino, and that's what gives them that strangeness to our eyes, that there is no colouring at all. And albino humans, I think, tend to have a very blue eyes, I think, if I'm not mistaken, and that's because blue is where there's almost no pigment in the eye at all, where a dark brown colour is because there's a lot of pigment in the eye. Now for ferrets, that translates, rather than a blue eye, as a red eye, because what you're doing is you're seeing right through to the back, to the retina, to some of the blood vessels, and that's what you're seeing in the red. It's not a sign of evil. It is literally just the back part of the ferret's eye that you're seeing. What makes it an albino is the red eye, in that you can get ferrets that are completely white, but they have a black eye, which means they haven't been punched. It means that they still have the ability to have melanin, in that their eyes are clearly dark, and so they have melanin in their eyes, and it's just that for whatever reasons their coat doesn't have any colouring in it. So this is definitely an albino. He's got the red, but there are albinos and there are albinos, and again, if you're new to ferrets or new to albinos, animals, they will all just look the same to you. But what I want to start looking at with the few that I'm going to bring today are the fact that you can still have differences in that. Excuse me. Now Sid here is, hopefully you can see, quite white. His fur is actually pretty white. It's got that yellowness to it, but it's what I would maybe call a pale lemon. If you wanted to argue, or a cream colour. It is very light, and it's also super soft. Not that that has anything to do with his colouring, it's just that he is super soft, which is another way we tell him apart from the other boys. And again, he currently is very light, but when they molt he could come back in an apricot colour next year, so which is why we know from the fur, because the fur will always be soft, and that's one of the reasons we managed to tell him apart from his brother Snaffles. And the other thing to talk about as well is the eyes, as I've mentioned before, but from the point of view of the eyes can almost be, they can be almost like a ruby red, they can be a pink. So I'd say this one, little squiddles, they're kind of like a quartzy pinky rose, in that they're not a deep red, they're not a deep ruby red, they're much more of this pink. They're not as dense, so they're kind of like lighter, like a quartz colour almost, aren't you, dude? So this here is Snaffles. He's in the same group as Sid, so we call them brothers, but technically they're not brothers, to my knowledge. No, he isn't actually, because Snaffles is a lot younger. So hopefully you can start seeing now that Snaffs again is a slightly different shape to Sid. I don't know if you can see that, but he's actually slightly chunkier here. And he's actually on the back, he's a lot darker, so that he is still slightly muddy. He's wanting to be a polecat, I think. So he's got, all along here is darker. It's difficult to show in that he's slightly wet fur, but hopefully you can see there's a much darker line of yellow. But even then, his sides here, come on dude, on the side there is also slightly yellower. Hold on, I just need to bribe him. Hopefully you can see as well the side behind his ears, this neck part on either side. Can you see that that's slightly yellower, and the whole of him is generally a slightly yellower? And where if Sid was a pale lemon, what would I call this? This is more, there's more of an orange tint in it, so I wouldn't call it apricot, but it's more of a very light, super light sunflower, in that there's more of an orange to it, where I think of as a lemon as being more of a pure yellow, where I think of as a sunflower being more orangey in colour, it's got more red in it. And then I think of apricot obviously as a more of a yellowy orange. So, you know, it's super light. It's certainly not a sunflower colour, but it's that yellower, reddy yellow sides to him. His eyes are currently shut in delight. They are similar to Sid's. I would say they're slightly darker red, if you can see that. It's another way of telling them apart. They aren't as, the way the quartz thing isn't there, they feel more, they're denser in their colouring. Yes, dude, have a bit more oil. I'm not sure I'd go as far as ruby. I still don't think they've got that depth of colour for ruby, but they're certainly darker than Sid's. So for all this is also an albino and he has no colouring in him per se, he clearly does in terms of the yellows. So then, this here is Spooks. He was found in a graveyard in Walsingham. We got him as a kit, full of ticks, full of fleas. His ear was literally closed in from dried blood, from where the ticks had been in his ears and been on the outside of his ears, and literally the dried blood had closed his ear shut. And it took a week before I could slowly get that open because he was in so much pain and so scared still. And then we fed him chicken. And he turned into this monster. He used to be teeny tiny, literally about this big. And then he turned into this monster boy, didn't you? So this is what happens when you feed them cooked chicken. So this is Spooks here, and again you can see he's a bit lighter. I would call him he's more of a white, again more of that pale lemon to white or light cream, so kind of like Sid, but I'd even say slightly lighter in that he doesn't have that darker yellow streak down there. If you look at him face on, you can see that he's got a very different face. His eyes protrude more, and I think that's the individual ferret rather than anything to do with colouring per se. And again, they protrude more, they're just bigger, and they're like big red currants. And if you notice as well, I don't know if you can see, but he's actually got a slightly longer muzzle than Sid and Snaps. They've both got slightly shorter muzzles. Again, that's more of an individual ferret rather than to do with albinos, but I just thought I'd point that out to try and show you the difference. That again, people are like, how do you tell the difference between an albino? What's one white ferret to another white ferret? And what I'm trying to show here that is that there's actually huge amounts of variation in their chonkiness, in the shape of their muzzle, sometimes the shape of their ears, you know, they've got big ears, how big their paws are, literally. And for us, it's about looking at the actual colouring within the colouring. So you can start seeing hopefully now that albinos still have variation to them. And again, you can see his tail has actually got a little bit more yellowness to it there. And if I show him that way, if you can see again, he's got a little yellow around his muzzle, and underneath there's a bit more. Hold on, let me try and do it this way. He's holding on to Mammy here. Can you see that there's a little bit more yellow under his bib? A little bit more. I mean, some of that's probably darkness to do with just the density of the fur, so, but there is a bit more yellow in there. And so finally this week, this is the lovely, delightful Old Man Red. Old man as in he must be at least 7, possibly older still, and he's starting to look his age. Again, he's quite light, he's tiny, as I'm sure you can see, compared to even the earlier boys. I've kind of gone middle, Spooks being big and then Red being teeny tiny, but hopefully even from Sid and Snaff you can see how tiny this little man is. And he is a man. A lot of people think he's a Jill because he's so small, but no, he is a fully grown old man. Again, he's lighter on the sides, a bit like Sid. He's got that line of darker fur there. Again, his paws are slightly darker, if you can see those. And he's got the darkness a little bit around his ears as well. What I want to show you is, it's not actually as noticeable today, but he's got a wonderful pink nose, but actually there's a little bit of brown on the very end of his nose. It's slightly different, it's orangey, it's more like a nicotine brown kind of staining. And that's actually, I think you can see him licking his nose quite a lot, and that's just because he's old, he's got things going on with him, and so he's licking, and the licking is actually staining a little bit. The other thing you can probably notice with Red is that his eyes are quite cloudy. So that there is a cloudiness from a cataract in his eye, and the other eye is starting to get a little cloudy, but it's still slightly clear. And when he was younger, Red had proper beautiful ruby red eyes, and I think you can possibly see a little bit of that, but there is clouding now coming in because he is an old man. You can start seeing he's an old man. His fur's just staying a bit more ruffled. It's not going down as much, and he's actually lost a lot of muscle mass, but you know, he's fine. So the only other thing to note about Red, not to do anything with colouring, but just while I'm here, you'll notice that he's got a really small tail. This is not some sort of docking that you might do for dogs, which I believe is illegal now, unless for certain circumstances. It's not illegal, but I wouldn't do it particularly. This is being taken off because he had what we call a chordoma. So I think it's bone. That basically on the end of his tail he had a massive lump that I think is a bone growth. I'd have to check that, I can't remember now. But it's this growth on the end of the tail and it almost becomes like a little hammer on the end of his tail. And we left it until such time, because it didn't bother him, but then it got to the stage where it was so heavy on the tip of his tail that it was actually weighing his tail down, so then his tail was dragging, which meant that then that growth was getting sores. Hopefully you can see a little bit now through the 4 different Beanos that we have. We've got a few others, but these are the main ones I wanted to show you the differences with. And hopefully now, after this video, you will go away and think, okay, I can start seeing differences in albinos and starting to know what to look for, muzzle shapes, eye colouring, kind of how white they are on the sides to any different darker colouring along their tails. All right, take care. We'll see you next week when we're going to be talking about silvers and black-eyed whites.